Hello, and welcome to another episode of Honest Conversations, where we peel back the layers no one dares to touch. Today's truth is raw. We're asking, what really happens when a strong woman meets a weak man? Not the fantasy version, not the polite version, but the quiet unravelling that happens behind closed doors, in love, in power, and in the silence that slowly breaks a woman's spirit. You see, strength in a woman doesn't always look like loudness or defiance. Sometimes it's grace under fire. But what happens when that strength keeps meeting weakness? Not the kind that cries for help, but the kind that hides behind charm, behind silence, behind indecision. That's where the story begins. And that's where many women start to lose themselves, quietly, one compromise at a time. The worst thing you can do is get married to a weak man. A man who cannot defend himself, cannot stand up for his wife or family. A man who easily changes his opinion based on circumstances. Listen to me closely. Marrying a weak man is not merely an unfortunate choice. It is a slow, subtle unravelling that begins in the quiet moments and finishes in the places we expected to feel safest. I say that not to inflame, but because the truth of it is practical and tactile. Weakness in a husband or father is not always loud. It may arrive dressed in charm, politeness, and a sincere desire to avoid conflict. But its effect is corrosive. It changes the architecture of a home, shifts the burdens of responsibility, confuses children about authority, and forces the partner who can hold to carry more than love was ever meant to bear. Start where people usually don't want to begin, with a definition that matters. When I say weak man, I do not mean a man who is gentle, or a man who is quiet, or a man who struggles with fear on occasion. I mean a man whose centre gives way under pressure. Someone who cannot take a principled stand, who folds when his spouse or family needs protection, who repeatedly defers his convictions to whatever keeps the moment comfortable. This kind of weakness is primarily moral and emotional. It is the absence of consistent inner conviction, the inability to weigh consequences and follow through, the habit of changing opinions to match the loudest voice in the room. It masquerades as flexibility. It calls itself peacemaking. But there is a difference between flexibility and malleability, between listening and abandoning. Imagine a home as a tent held up by ropes. Strength in a partner is not about dominance, it is about tension and balance. A strong man can hold his rope taut when wind comes, adjust and retie if needed. A weak man loosens his rope because he fears the friction of conflict. He lets go so no one will shout at him, or because he fears being disliked more than he values the shelter of the tent. The woman who hoped to rest under that shelter finds herself pulling at his rope secretly, tightening it for him, while pretending everything is fine. Over time, she becomes exhausted. She learns to do the holding. She learns to take on decisions that do not belong entirely to her. Her softness hardens into responsibility. Her rest becomes vigilance. This is why weakness in a man feels like betrayal over time. The betrayal is not always an act of malice. Often it's a quiet abdication. At first, it can be charming. He is accommodating, agreeable, never heavy-handed. He wants to be liked. He avoids fights. He says the right things in public and smiles in family photos. But the first true test comes later, when an external pressure arrives that requires him to choose between convenience and conviction, between being comfortable and being just. That might be his mother who undermines his wife, a boss who asks for dishonesty, a neighbour who crosses boundaries, or a child who needs correction. In those moments, the weak man will most often lean toward the path that preserves his ease, preserves his image, or spares him the immediate discomfort of confrontation. He will choose what keeps him liked, not what is needed. The consequences are concrete and lived. When a husband cannot defend his wife against disrespect from his own family, from friends, from social circles, it teaches the world that she is not fully protected. It teaches her to anticipate being undermined. It forces her into a vigilance that robs intimacy. She watches him shrink away as his mother's sarcasm cuts through a holiday gathering. And she learns that she cannot count on him to shield her. She becomes the one who must speak up, who must set boundaries, who must bear the social cost for both of them. This is not empowerment by choice, it's burden by necessity. Now consider children. Fathers anchor moral gravity in a family, not because they must dominate, but because children need to see adults take stands and accept consequences. A weak father confuses this picture. Sons learn that authority can be negotiated through temperament rather than principle. Daughters learn that protection is conditional and that the protectors are sometimes passive. Discipline becomes inconsistent. Boundaries are set by mothers in private, then overridden or ignored in public by a man unwilling to maintain them. Children grow up with the false idea that accountability is optional and that silence can substitute for responsibility. That breeds a generation that either fears taking a stand or thinks standing up means merely avoiding trouble, not doing what is right. Let's look deeper, to the roots. Where does this weakness come from? Often it is not purely a character flaw, but a story of fear, insecurity, and learned helplessness. Many weak men were raised in environments where assertiveness was punished or misunderstood. Perhaps their emotional needs were discounted, or they were modelled an example of masculinity that equated assertiveness with cruelty. So they overcorrect into passivity. Others were protected from responsibility, never asked to make hard choices. And so when real pressure arrives, their muscles for courage are underdeveloped. Some are socialised to perform masculinity through image rather than substance. They become adept at appearing confident while lacking the discipline behind it. In other cases, trauma, shame, or the fear of rejection creates a corrosive self-doubt that whispers, "If I stand firm, I will lose love." So they trade integrity for affection. And in that trade, the family loses. It's important to note the difference between a man who is insecure and trying, who seeks growth, who apologises, who listens for correction, and a man who is weak by temperament. Someone who habitually chooses comfort over conviction, and who does not take responsibility for the inner work required to change. The former will fail sometimes and come back stronger. The latter will find ways to rationalise every retreat. He will say, "I didn't want to fight. It wasn't worth it," or "she's overreacting," until the family has learned not to expect him to show up. The pattern that follows is predictable and painful. When a woman marries such a man, she gradually shoulders the weight of decisions and moral labour. Not because she wanted it, but because no one else will. She becomes the family's de facto anchor, budgeting, disciplining, navigating in-laws, confronting cheating behaviours, handling reputational risks, deciding about children's schooling and health matters, all while trying to preserve the illusion of partnership. Love, over time, becomes duty. The tenderness that once existed begins to harden into pragmatic arrangements. He does certain things, she does others. Intimacy is increasingly transactional. She stops relying on him for emotional safety because he has not proven trustworthy in that role. Instead of shared vulnerability, there is a hierarchy of labour with her at the top. And there is a gendered cost to that. Society has long divided masculine and feminine roles in crude ways, but the deeper truth is that healthy partnerships require both partners to embody a mix of strength and softness. When a man abandons his share of resolute strength, the woman does not simply fill the gap without change. She becomes more masculine, in the sense of taking responsibility. And unless both partners are conscious of this shift, it creates misaligned expectations. She will expect a partner who protects and decides. He will expect gratitude for minimal involvement. Resentment breeds. It is also vital to address how a weak man behaves in conflict. He tends to avoid it, yes, but avoidance often takes specific forms. He may change the subject when a serious issue arises. He may joke at the expense of honesty. He may appease the loudest voice in the room, or he may concede in private and do nothing in public. These actions are not neutral. They communicate that truth and justice are negotiable. That behaviour erodes trust. Over time, his spouse learns that when a crisis comes, she cannot rely on him publicly. She must manage reputational risks herself. That realisation changes the dynamics of respect. Respect grows from reliability. If a man cannot be relied upon when it matters, his spouse's respect, and, crucially, her feeling of being treasured, diminishes. Let's talk about intimacy, because it is the thing people most want to protect. Intimacy requires vulnerability and safety. Strength in a mature partner is paradoxically what enables vulnerability. The ability to bear another person's pain without being overwhelmed. The steadiness to love them through failure. The firmness to set boundaries without punitive anger. A weak man cannot be counted on to hold that space. He is either swept away by anger when challenged, or he withdraws at the first sign of emotional heat. The result is a home where vulnerability is risky. A wife who needs to share shame or fear may hesitate, because his reaction will either be absent or destabilising. That absence is a slow death of the tender, connective tissue of marriage. There's also a moral dimension often overlooked. A weak man can enable wrongdoing, not by causing it directly, but by failing to challenge it. If a friend cheats, a strong man will speak against it. A weak man will laugh it off or remain silent to avoid friction. If a workplace practice harms someone, a strong man may risk his job to correct it. A weak man will rationalise. If a parent delegates the moral upbringing of children solely to the mother, while undermining her behind closed doors, the children learn to cut corners. Weakness thus becomes complicity. Now, this may sound damning. It is, and it must be, because the stakes are high. But understanding the problem also opens the door to solutions. First, for women considering partnership or already in it, clarity is essential. Watch how a man behaves under pressure more than how he speaks in comfort. Observe his response to injustice, to the suffering of others, to conflict within his family. Does he step in to defend the vulnerable, or does he calculate whether intervention will cost him socially? That pattern is predictive. Pay attention to who he becomes when facing his parents, his friends, or institutional authority. That is where character shows up. Second, insist on shared responsibility. Partnership is not a shelter from taking stands. It is a place where stands are taken together. If you find yourself doing the moral labour alone, name it. Ask for partnership explicitly. Say, when this happens, I need you to speak up with me. If he resists, ask why. Watch whether he is willing to do the work to change. Therapy, reading, mentorship, and small acts of courage are all possible. If he will not participate, you must decide whether the relationship's trajectory is compatible with the home you want to build. Third, for men who recognise themselves in this description and do not like it, there is hope, and it requires work. Courage is habit, not a moment. Begin with small, consistent actions that practice choosing principle over immediate comfort. Stand up in small, safe contexts. Correct a disrespectful joke. Speak up when someone is slighted. Make a decision in the face of mild discomfort and follow through. Build your muscles for consequence. Surround yourself with mentors who model principled courage. Seek therapy to unpick patterns of fear and avoidance that go back to childhood. And understand that true strength is not spectacle. It is consistency. It is choosing the harder good instead of the easy peace. In doing so, men do not become less loving. They become more dependable, which, paradoxically, produces deeper love. There is a communal part to this too. Families and cultures often reward the man who keeps the peace by being agreeable. Sometimes people socialise a man out of his backbone by praising his compliance. To counter that, communities need to value and reinforce principled courage. This means applauding men who choose integrity over image, who protect the vulnerable at cost to themselves, and who take responsibility in messy situations. It also means teaching boys that strength is not the absence of emotion, but the discipline to feel and act responsibly. A difficult but necessary point. Do not romanticize suffering as a way to change a man. There is a pattern where women hope their love, sacrifice, or patient endurance will fix weakness. That's not charity. It's strategic misplacement of expectation. People change when they are accountable and when they decide to change. You cannot guilt someone into becoming principled. You can only require behaviour that aligns with your values and decide whether that partnership is sufficient for the life you want. Practical behaviours to watch and demand include public backing of your decisions and dignity, consistent participation in parenting and household authority, willingness to confront family members when they overstep, emotional steadiness in crisis, and an appetite for moral clarity. If a man is willing to show up in these ways, he may make mistakes, we all do, but his trajectory is toward strength. If he continually retreats or rationalises his retreats, that pattern is corrosive. There will be moments when the distinction between weakness and disagreement is muddy. A man may legitimately disagree on method without being weak. The test is pattern and motive. Does he bend to the loudest opinion because he values external approval? Does he change his stance to avoid discomfort consistently? Or does he consider, make a principled decision, and explain it with courage and tenderness? Strength will make room for disagreement because it does not feel threatened by challenge. Weakness conflates disagreement with danger. Finally, there is an inner question each person must ask themselves. What do I want family to look like in 15 years? If you want a home that breathes safety, that models accountability for children, that can face external storms without collapsing, then you need a partner who will share both tenderness and backbone. If you want a partnership that dissolves into practical cohabitation with moral drift, that will happen too, slowly and sometimes catastrophically. Neither outcome is mysteriously assigned. They are constructed by choices, one small act at a time. So when you look at your partner, or at the man you might marry, do not be satisfied with a pleasant surface. Watch how he behaves when discomfort arrives. Watch whom he defends when it costs him to defend them. Watch how he treats those who cannot reward him. Watch his willingness to accept correction and to grow. That is the man who will hold the tent when winds come. The rest will ask you to hold it for him. And the cost of that will be a shelter that leaks in places you did not expect. This is not an argument for rigid gender roles or for expecting infallibility. It is, however, an insistence on the practical reality that family life depends on consistent moral and emotional labour. When a man refuses his portion of that labour, the house tilts. The solution is not punishment, nor is it a simple checklist. It is a demand, a clear, principled, and loving demand for partnership that includes accountability, courage, and the willingness to grow. Love is not made stronger by covering for abdication. It is deepened when both partners are willing to be called out and better themselves. If this message leaves you heavy, let it also leave you armed. Strengthening a household begins with clarity about who you are willing to build with and how. It begins with honest conversations, with firm boundaries, with mentorship and therapy where needed, and with refusing to romanticize quiet abdication as grace. The worst thing is not to marry at all, nor is it to marry someone who needs time. The worst thing is to marry someone who, when the moment of danger comes, chooses comfort over conviction, and then expects you to carry the cost quietly. Stand for wisdom in those choices. Demand a builder, not a guest. Demand a man whose backbone is visible when stakes are high, whose convictions are steadier than his need to be liked, and whose courage grows in the small things before the big ones arrive. In that house, you will find shelter that is both tender and secure, and that is worth the carefulness of choosing rightly.